or you're willing to do that, just raise your hand and Max will find you and give you the ability to unmute yourself. And we'll just have a little dive into your site. There were some really good assignments, some people really doing well, in sort of identifying risks and the like. And I did see a few common, I suppose, problems or issues that were occurring for quite a few of you. So I'm going to address those as well. But let's dive into a site.
I've got Stephen saying he's okay with that. So I might let you allow you to speak, Stephen. So hopefully this works. And you should be able to unmute yourself and join in the conversation. Hello, Stephen.
Hello, Stephen. We can't hear you. You might be just having, you've unmuted yourself, getting the mic working. That's okay. We'll give him a second.
No problem. We'll just launch your site.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure I will. I know I will. I will be able to get Stephen's up and running. Hang on a second.
Is that working?
Yes. Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Now, remind me, Stephen, I did have a very brief look at yours. You gave us a Google Earth. So what was the intersection?
Sandgate Road with Robinson Road East in Virginia, or G-Bung. I think it's Virginia, that technically there.
Hang on a second. Okay, I think we're getting closer. So it was Sandgate Road and
Robinson Road East.
Robinson's Road East. Sorry, just give me a second here. There we go.
And you're familiar with the Dutch Reach there, Stephen, or was that just a quick Google in the background?
No, I have heard of it. Spoken about recently. Yes, I think they're pushing it in the UK as well, from memory. I think they're trying to push it pretty hard there.
Right. Okay. Here we go. Is this the one?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, lots happening here, isn't there? Okay. So let's talk about this. Let's go through it sort of systematically and try and talk about exposure, likelihood, and severity, and just calibrate our thinking around that. I think it'll help everybody. And we'll talk generally about the risks there. So what factors were you seeing that influenced exposure at this one, Stephen?
So it's very high volume road with pedestrian and cyclist interface with the traffic. It's a crossroads as well as driveways for the McDonald's. I put it down as a BP, but it's a Shell, the servo, on the other side of the intersection. And on the other side as well, there's a service road that ties in near to that red car on the right there. There's a service road where you can turn right or left. So you've got to factor in, that's on Vauxhall Street, you've got to factor in turning traffic, as well as the bus stops there as well. It's very high. I think it's over 60,000 vehicles today, and it's posted speed at 70.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So that's good. And loving the fact that your consideration of exposure is really focused around that volume of vehicles, but also volumes of pedestrians, volumes of cyclists, volumes of motorcyclists. That's right. And what you're talking about there in terms of the traffic generators and the like is good. And we'll find when we're sort of stepping our way into safe system assessing, that when we get to doing the assessment, we don't actually need to focus as much on that, because we're just really dealing with those numbers if you've got them. And so that's good. But certainly, as you say, high volume intersection here. So that's good. All right. Well, what are now some of the factors that may influence the likelihood of crash?
That's probably where we're looking at those interfaces, the number of driveways and the slip lanes through there. There's multiple driveways in close succession through there.
Yep. Yes.
The other road as well, Robinson Road East, is also a major thoroughfare. Again, probably more so exposure, but that's also a high volume connection to the western suburbs and on the north side of Brisbane.
Yep.
So also high volume of traffic turning across.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So that will, as you say, it's going to be captured in a safe system assessment within the volume exposure aspect of it. But you're certainly right. I mean, in a sort of traditional look at risk, that's going to increase your likelihood, but we've sort of, in a safe system assessment, drawn that out as exposure and then likelihood and then severity.
I don't know if it was likelihood. On the northern side there, I sort of looked at the differing types of movements. So you've got decelerating traffic turning into either the bus stop or the service station, as well as accelerating traffic looking at to their right as opposed to their left when joining. So that there is a bit of a conflict area where you've got lots of different changes in speed. You've got an end of a lane, so people are changing lanes at the same time, and it's all sort of fairly free flow.
Yeah, that's absolutely a likelihood factor. That's a really good one. I mean, the complexity there, it's an area of a lot of traffic turbulence. The people weaving, going in and out and accelerating and putting their head around. I mean, I'm sure some of you are seasoned traffic engineers and have probably done the traffic impact assessments on the corner development here of a service station or some sort of, fast food joint or the like. And it's a constant challenge, that access point and you've got this slip lane and a lot happens around there. And the likelihood of crash increases the more complexity and things that are going on. So that's a really good one. Yeah. Any other things that sprung out for you when thinking about the things that might influence the chance that people crash?
I think, I was looking at those driveways as well on the other side, the McDonald's sides, that again, that movement there, you're going to have people crossing the turn lane. So again, focusing on the right-hand side, turning around to the left, and you've got vehicles slowing or stopping for the red light as well. So
Yep.
Potential conflicts there. The visibility obscured. You've got a lot of signage and banners around, so it's
Yep.
not easy to see.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember what else I put now.
Yeah. No, these are all really good. I mean, I suppose, so as we go through a full safe system assessment, we actually list out not only the things that we think increase the chance that a crash is going to happen, as you're pointing out, and all the ones you're pointing out are really good ones that we'll be looking at, frequency of access points, visibility obstructions, the speed itself, the operating speed would be a big one. The width of the road, the complexity and the like. But we also look in a safe system assessment, and we do document down the things that reduce the chance that crashes would happen compared to sort of other intersections. So I think in this one, I mean, we shouldn't ignore some of the good things as well. Oh, that wasn't the assignment, Stephen, so you've done by that. But things that in a full safe system assessment, it's got lighting, it's signalized, and I'm going to hazard a guess here. It's fully controlled. It's got red light arrows the whole time. They don't drop off at any point. I mean, they go to green, but I highly doubt they'd be letting people filter across that many lanes of traffic. But that being said, I've seen it done before. I was very unhappy to see it done, but the fully controlled is going to help from that perspective. The surface and the line marking's decent. It's clear. It's there. It's a bit of the bike lane's a bit warm there. I suppose the other one in likelihood when we're thinking about other road users, I mean, a bike lane it helps out to a degree. I mean, it's got an area for bikes, but it is only that separation by a white line with no sort of buffer area there. So there's some challenges there. we think about runoff road crashes, things like power poles close to the close to the road, their presence is the likelihood factor. We'll get into severity in a second, but what have we got here? Just a concrete post or something. Okay. So their presence is that likelihood factor. The surface, another likelihood factor, looks pretty good throughout, obviously. And then there was a few little things like this pit lid for a motorcyclist might be something you might notice, a little likelihood factor increase for motorcycle crashes. But that's all looking pretty good. Let's jump to severity then, Stephen. What things do you think are influencing the severity of a crash now?
So the angles, one, I don't know whether it was relevant or not, but I know from observations that people come out of the McDonald's, for example, and cross all the way over into the right turn lane. So they're crossing multiple lanes of traffic to get into the right turn lane coming out of the driveway, which increases the likelihood of the bullet style vehicle hitting them across there in the impact angle.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if that's a common movement to go out all the way over to there, then yes, that's going to increase likelihood of crash. Yep, that's a good one. That's a likelihood, as you say.
The speed of the vehicles through the intersection, it is a high speed road, and people are tending to drive through the intersection quite fast. And again, you've got that potential crossing movement, which is a controlled intersection. But if there is an incident there, it's a decent impact angle at high speed.
And they're a couple of the big ones, and you've done really well there. I mean, impact speed and angle for passenger vehicle crashes are our big ones, and you've done exactly that.
Potential secondary impacts as well with the waiting vehicles at the signals, or cyclist presence as well in the event of a secondary collision. Yeah.
Now that brings up a really interesting point, the secondary collision. I mean, here's your sort of, we talked a little bit about secondary impacts at intersections, leaving the road and hitting poles. And you've rightly pointed out, could hit cars, could hit pedestrians, could hit poles, or when they come through, and maybe going fast at 2 a.m. or something, and a vehicle, running the red, vehicle pulls out, they avoid, and there's lots of poles, isn't there? I mean, we've concentrated poles around this intersection. Now, are they frangible? Are they not? Well, it looks like I don't think that that would be a slip-based signal pedestal, because I don't think anybody does that. Actually, I think that's just been bolted in. But certainly, if somebody corrects me there, but you've got lots of fixed pole hazards around the intersection, which are going to be quite severe if struck, especially side on. So impact speed, angle, and for vulnerable road users, it's really speed. If you notice nobody was wearing helmets and things, you might note that down, but that's sort of a smaller factor in the severity compared to the speed of the impact. The percentage of heavy vehicles is often one that we put in. So it's got quite a higher number of heavy vehicles. There's a bit more of a chance that a larger vehicle strikes, and there's obviously going to be more energy involved in that. Another likelihood factor. Oh, sorry, Stephen, go.
No, that's right. In terms of likelihood, would you look at the nature of the businesses around and the potential driver behaviour? So if you're looking for if you're this sort of area, someone's likely looking at where's the driveway I've got to turn in, where's that shop that I'm chasing, as opposed to focusing on the driving. Would that come under likelihood, or would you need to observe that behaviour to include that?
No, I think this is where there's a bit of judgment required in a safe system assessment. I think those are fair things to be looking at. To understand your land use is important. I mean, certainly things like if we know there's schools around and we know there could be that different sort of use of it. If there's, as you say, lots of lots of shops and things that they're trying to work out, or parking, or trying to look for car parks and those sort of things. You can sort of conjure these scenarios up. You've got to be a bit realistic in how much this is actually influencing your likelihood of crash. It's probably small bits, but it's something you might want to point out. So that's a good one. Another likelihood factor I was just noticing there, where in the street view gives us that image of these people walking their kid along, and you sort of go, the length of that crossing for a pedestrian, that in a safe system assessment is a likelihood factor. Now, in traditional sort of road safety analysis, you'd probably have talked about it as an exposure factor, because the amount of time that they are exposed. But in a safe system assessment, in order not to double count anything, we separated that out, the exposure out, to how many of these movements are going to happen, how many pedestrians are going to cross there, and then we put the length that they're crossing as a likelihood factor. And this one's a sort of an interesting one. I mean, you could imagine if an old person is trying to walk across here in the phase, they may not make it, and they will end up propping here and waiting probably, which is not a great spot. It has no protection, no refuge. So those are likelihood factors. You've done really well there. So thinking about those angles of impact is a really good one. So we can just sort of have a look there, and we're seeing some you can see there, you've got bullet vehicles, you've got sort of impact angles. There are, definitely possibilities for fairly close to right angle crashes, which we know around that 50 km/h is going to be quite severe. I would generally, in most cases, my major sort of concern are these as the bullet vehicles. So these ones coming out of lesser roads are less likely. There's not, they can be a bullet vehicle, but they're coming out of sort of areas where they haven't been driving straight for a long time. Obviously a sort of industrial style area. It's unlikely that they're going to be a bullet vehicle, but it's possible. This one may be a little bit more likely, but that kink in the road is going to be an influence in them not sort of overshooting. So it might just have to be, it'll be more of a conscious effort for them to be the bullet vehicle. These are certainly the bullet vehicle there. Okay, that's good, Stephen. So tell me now, what are you thinking we could do to influence exposure, likelihood, and/or severity? Any ideas?
Without doing traffic modeling, I looked at whether or not, this intersection here, it's fairly low volume, but whether or not there's a need for them to you could reduce some of the phasing potentially and send this traffic down. There's a fairly major roundabout interchange to the south, and you could sort of change the phasing there. It's just a bit further south. There's a big interchange. Separating the cyclists if there's an opportunity to widen it and provide some sort of protected cycle lanes.
Yeah,
I think we've
gone to the wrong intersection. Sorry.
That's right. The BP is probably a big one for me. There's an intersection just to the north of that is just loops back around. Whether this could be redesigned and we separate the bus stop, maybe provide a bit more protection to waiting pedestrians and move it away from the major intersection.
Mm-hmm.
That just sort of loops back around. It just feeds those businesses there. So there's an opportunity to change the style of that. I don't know whether it's an opportunity here with that major through movement to put a raised safety platform on the approach, at least on that northbound approach, to try and get good compliance with the speed.
So with that, what do you think that would influence in terms of exposure, likelihood, or severity?
Severity, if it reduces the speed through the intersection.
Yep, absolutely.
So the redesign of the entry here, potentially likelihood, if we can move some of these vulnerable road users away from the intersection and the bus stop and get rid of some of these conflict movements, potentially they could come in from that intersection, come in to the BP and then come out of a different area, so they're not coming in and out of the same area there, where they could use those side roads to come out.
Yep.
Yeah, and then just with the way to protect the cyclists. I don't know if it's anywhere we can put lane dividers or investigate relocating the footpaths a bit, or putting the protected pathways in, either through some sort of fencing around, or bollards or something like that, just to protect the vulnerable road users.
Yeah. Okay. Some really great stuff there, and some things that are sitting in each of the categories of exposure, likelihood, and severity. Really, exposure, is going to have to be something that influences the volume of vehicles or pedestrians or cyclists going through here, and that could be through alterations to the wider traffic movements, exactly as you said there, Stephen. And so, thinking about could we block off some of the intersection? Now, practically you may not be able to do that, but it would influence the exposure to crashes if we were to do that. If we were to create a fully sort of off-road facility for cyclists, maybe a shared path that somehow came through here, I'd probably be still putting that in the reduction in the likelihood, just in this case, because the cyclists coming along here, but this section between sort of here and here, as they go along, they're kind of, I would say they are not exposed to that vehicle, those vehicle issues out here, but they've certainly got the driveways to deal with, the access points, and then they're going to have to cross here at some point. And that's still, to me, if we're looking at this as an assessment of all of this, the only way I could really sort of say changes to exposure for cyclists, for example, would be to either ban them from this road and say, no, this is a major arterial road, it's a priority traffic route at high speed, we're not going to have cyclists on here. We've got a lovely parallel route for you somewhere, which has got great facilities, and that's where you should be going if you need to travel along here. But again, practical challenges with that sort of stuff. But I think it's a reasonable thing. But so exposure, again, back to numbers. Really good ideas there around trying to reduce the likelihood by consolidating access to, making this simpler. That's going to reduce the likelihood of crashes. And the raised is severity. So severity is going to be really slowing vehicles, changing angles of impact, and those sorts of things around here. Can also be actually, there's a couple more that are worth talking about. So if we were to sort of say, okay, we've got power poles, dotted along here, we want to move the power poles back maybe to, property boundaries, something like that. Very expensive thing to do, but what would that influence? Well, it would actually influence the likelihood of the crash, okay? Because if somebody was to leave the road, they could mount there and come back, and they wouldn't be involved in a crash as such. If, say, that goes out here and it goes past what would be defined as a clear zone, it's still just a reduction in likelihood. People want to then sort of say that they're not exposed to that. No, that's not true. It's less likely for them to hit that. So
installing guardrails, so shifting the poles and installing guardrail, would that reduce the severity? Because the guardrail then becomes the what you'll hit, but it's less severe than the post. So if you're able to relocate the post and then run guardrail between the driveways.
Spot on. Absolutely. That's exactly right. So that would be a reduction in the severity of crash, because if they were to leave the road, hit the guardrail, there's the crash. It's just much less severe to hit that, run along it, rather than hit the post. And there'll be some interesting yeah, exactly as you say, it'd be challenging to design your barrier to fit in there or do the like, but that's exactly the way we think of it as an assessor, is that reduces the severity of crash. It really
does that, how would that, if that's measuring for the road users and the motorist, what about the pedestrian? How does that is that exposure, or is that again likelihood? Is that then more likelihood with the guardrail because they're protected?
Oh, for pedestrian crashes?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. So if you were sort of to say that we were fully separating them, you could put that into exposure because they wouldn't be exposed to crashes. But I think when you you look bigger picture at it, you'd put it down to, as you say, likelihood, because it's if a vehicle was to miss that or get through it, the severity is going to be pretty much the same anyway. But so you're spot on. In that case, in your pedestrian column, you'd put it as a likelihood, but in your runoff road, you'd put it as a severity. So that's that's really good way to think of it. The other one people often want to do is say, oh, well, we're going to put, say they had pedestrians coming out of the auto barn and going over to the 7-Eleven, and they didn't want to bother walking down to the lights and across because nobody wants to walk that far. So that's their sort of desire line. And then if, we often see people saying, well, we'll put pedestrian fencing or pedestrian fencing down the median, for example, and saying that would eliminate the exposure. Well, no, that's another likelihood factor, because they're still going to go to the 7-Eleven because they need their Slurpee, and they're going to walk down to the lights and cross. When they cross at the lights, they're less likely to be struck, but it's still possible with the red light run or something like that. So it's not sort of eliminated that exposure to the crash. If we did an underpass or something like that, so they could get there without being exposed as such, then that would be our alterations to the exposure. Stephen, that was excellent. Really good analysis of the intersection. Now, I don't know if you know whether there's death and serious injury at this intersection. I guess there would be some pretty severe crashes at this intersection. But because this is your sort of typical, high volume, reasonably high speed road where we're just fully relying on everybody following that. And we know, unfortunately, that they don't do that all the time. We would love them to, but that's a bit of a challenge we face. Thank you, Stephen. That was really excellent. And we gave Stephen two prizes in the early trivia, didn't we?
We did, yes. Stephen's off to a red hot start.
I was going to say, give him another prize. Let's give him a minor prize as well. It was worthy of a major prize. But there's only so many. We have to send a shipping crate up to Queensland.
Thanks, Stephen. Thank you so much for sharing. It was fantastic. I'm just going to mute you now so you can go ahead and slurp your tea if you need.
That was good. So we can drop Stephen off there. Yep, beautiful. Good. I hope others sort of got something out of that in terms of that sort of structured thinking and the discussion around, is that exposure, is that likelihood? And that's really, we do concentrate a lot on that in this course because it's kind of fundamental to a safe system assessment for a few reasons. One big one being that we don't want sort of double counting of risk. So we really need to be sort of clear that we're not including things in multiple spots. So that is something that I did notice that was popping up a little bit in your assignment. So I will address that now with a few slides I just quickly slapped together. Now I haven't marked your assignments yet. I've had a look at a few of them just to gauge. You'll get that feedback shortly. And on Thursday, we're going to prime you up to go out and do the safe system assessment. So we want you to have that feedback, get a few ideas, and then jump into that. Max, any anything to comment on before I share some slides here?
So far, so good, Ken. Feel free to hop in.
Okay. Of course, we're recording the session, so you can catch up on it later if you want. So really good analysis there from Stephen on exposure, likelihood, and severity, and well done to those that I've seen who are getting it fairly right. One thing I did notice was there was really actually, very good knowledge from the group in what's sort of presenting risk. The issues that I was seeing were more around the categorization, and especially the categorization of exposure. And we just saw things popping in there that were really either likelihood or severity factors. So I'm just gonna address a few of those things. So we talked about what is exposure, and exposure in a safe system assessment is the number of vehicles, the number of pedestrians, the number of cyclists, the number of motorcyclists, the number of vehicles going through a point where the crash could happen, the conflict area. And so to alter that exposure, we need to be doing things that change the volumes. So take, for example, this one, which is the level crossing, where they put the mound of dirt and they've put a no entry sign or a road closed sign on the other side. You can see there that changed the volume of vehicles exposed to the level crossing crash. It's changing the numbers, okay? And the separated shared path facility, when it's completely sort of separated like this, if the cyclists were on the road beforehand, they're exposed to that crash. Even if they've got their own bike lane, they're still exposed to it because people could be distracted, be falling asleep, whatever, enter into the lane very easily. Okay. Here, we've separated them completely. This has changed the exposure to those crashes. Now, as I said, we're stepping you into safe system assessment. We didn't want to drop you in at the deep end. We want to just sort of wade you into it. And one of the things we haven't spent a lot of time on is some of the Austroads guidelines and some definitions and those sort of things. I wanted to sort of ease you into it. But the road user exposure in a definition, what are the numbers of road users exposed to a potential crash? So we're talking about the AADT. We're talking about the number of motorcyclists, cyclists, and pedestrians. Numbers is exposure. Now, you may not have the pedestrian volumes, but you're still thinking about what are the predicted numbers. And we've been doing this for a while, and we do see that people still have challenges with a few of these specific things, or there are areas that are not hugely clear in the Austroads guidance or the some of the state jurisdiction guidance. And so what we've done is try to fill the gap of some of those areas with some fact sheets. So we've got 6 fact sheets, which are on your memory stick and in Moodle, and you'll be able to go and look at those for some specific topics. And I really encourage you to have a flick through them just to get your head around some of those. But we do see different ones associated with how you safe system assess a long route project. I'll talk to you about that one a bit more later. How do you work out the exposure at an intersection when you've got a side road traffic volume and a main road traffic volume? With cycle facilities, at what point does it change from exposure to likelihood to severity? How do you work out likelihood scoring and a few other things? So they're going to be a good resource for you. They'll help you through some of those challenges, and we've intentionally got them there as things we say have been a little bit unclear with industry, and just to fill a gap in clarifying until Austroads does a second version of the safe system assessment framework. Keep your questions coming in, and Max will probably address a few of them behind the scenes. I will pause at different points and have a chat about those. We will have a break, probably Yeah, around half an hour's time, 25 minutes time. Maps remind me to pause for a break if I forget. Sometimes I just get so excited I keep ticking along. Don't forget to count your wallies, of course. This module is all about vulnerable road users, and to set up sort of platform for vulnerable road users, we really need to start thinking in a movement of place context or a link and place context. And so I'll explain sort of how that fits in with safe system. It's important in a safe system assessment to understand these things, not necessarily from your assessment perspective, as in where risk lies and where risk presents itself, but more for when you go to start making recommendations. And we want to make meaningful recommendations within a safe system assessment to the project team, things that they can action and that sort of fit with the aspirations of their project. So we're going to have a look at characteristics of vulnerable road users that align highly with safe system principles and things obviously that don't. And vulnerable road users being the term for pedestrians, cyclists and motorcyclists. And we're going to categorize key risk factors into exposure, likelihood and severity as we do. So let's start with movement and place. Now, as I say, could be called slightly different things depending on where you come from, your jurisdiction, but generally the concept is, actually it's probably easiest if I show the diagram to explain the concept if you're not familiar with it. And I picked a random one. It's actually a little bit of an older diagram from a Sydney road planning framework. The concept remains true with all the little tweaks and alterations. The general principles remain true. There's people playing around with it. But the idea is that we have roads and we have streets. And why did we originally have those? Well, we originally had those to move people and goods. That's what they were there. But over time, they've evolved and they now represent an integral part of the place of a city often. And some of them have really important place values, streets and roads. And by place, we mean areas for people to trade, people to mingle, to socialize, to interact. So we now sort of formally identify within this movement of place framework the importance of place of some of our roads and streets. And so what you end up doing then is categorizing any bit of road or street out there in this sort of matrix and saying, well, what's its movement function on the y-axis, or what's its place function here on the x-axis. And so the very easy example here in this one is a motorway. A motorway sits up there and it's got very high movement function. It has no place function. We do not want people trading, interacting, socializing on or near the motorway. That is not what it's there. Okay. Now, important thing to understand in this movement is it's not just movement of cars or trucks, right? It's movement of people and goods. So this could also be a cycleway. So, a strategic cycling corridor, a major sort of what we call the superhighway for bikes, it's a dedicated facility, maybe like that one I just showed before from Brisbane. We don't want people socializing, trading, interacting on the major cycleway because it's about moving people through there as rapidly as possible. Right down the other end, of course, we've got these what we call sort of places for people, and they've become places where movement function is very, very low importance. Place is super important. So this is where we you know, we really want, and we've got this wonderful trade and interaction and all these things happening, and they're exciting. And you usually find these are your malls or your malls, and they're areas where we're seeing a lot of that, and movement functions not there, and nor do we want or need it to be. So a strategic framework planning decision has been made to not, you know, want to have movement through there. And of course, then we get some, you know, more complicated areas. Well, if we go down here, we've got this sort of local streets category in the Sydney framework, the old Sydney framework, where we talk about, you know, fairly low place value, fairly low movement function, residential streets, and those sorts of areas. Movement corridors, your big arterials, usually, and then vibrant streets. They're tough ones. High place value, high movement. They're usually your high streets, you know, your Oxford Street, your Sydney Road. I can't even think of a major one in Brisbane. Somebody will know one, but you know, you've got the shops, the bars, the cafes, but you're also, it's your major arterial. And often people go, you know, they end up saying, well, it's actually a public transport route, and it's the, you know, bicycle priority route, and it's the, you know, pedestrian priority area. So, you know, you've got everything going on there, and they're really hard to deal with, but that's what we're going to sort of talk through. But it becomes really important to sort of early on understand where the road that you're assessing fits within this. And as I say, it's because we can achieve safe system aligned outcomes, so highly aligned safe system outcomes, in quite a few different ways. But it's going to have major effects on the place and the movement. And so we need to be conscious of this. Because I can certainly make a road high speed, very aligned with safe system principles. But I'll tell you now, it ain't going to be a nice place, as in a place here. It will not align highly with place value. Also, I can make areas extremely good place and well aligned with safe system principles, but we're not going to have high movement function through there. So we can achieve both, but there are outcomes to that. N Street, thank you, Roddy. Good one. Yep. So as we sort of develop along with movement in place, we can sort of use a safe system assessment as an aspirational tool to try to alter something from maybe slightly move it out of its category, and thinking about how we can use safe system to do that. And you know, I think the tactical urbanism stuff that's been happening over the last couple of years is a great example of moving places away from a movement corridor and more into a place. So here's a little snip example of some of that going on. But anyway, we'll come back to that. But let's take this example now. Okay, the old artistic impression cartoon. But let's say that this is a place for people, squarely put into that place for people. So what does that mean? We aspire for it to have really high place value, and we really don't have a major movement function here. We really don't. We're not the same. Movement's not our important thing. Movement of people includes not our major important in terms of through this area. So what I wanted you to do is have a little bit of a think about what could we alter in the infrastructure here to take this from its current form to make it better aligned with safe system principles, acknowledging it's a place for people. We want to make it a place to trade, to interact, to have that vibrant excitement going. Okay, but I'm not going to let you off that easy. When you come up with an idea, right? I want you also to just put in brackets E or L or S. Or we're going to do this. I propose to do this, and it's going to alter the exposure or the likelihood or the severity, just to keep you calibrated in your mind of making sure you understand that. So, maybe you say, actually, I won't give an example. You can just come up with them, but just put in brackets an E, an L, or an S to indicate the change that you're proposing will influence exposure likelihood or severity. So currently a 40 km/h speed limit environment. You can see there pedestrians, cars, buses, people riding through there. What can we do to alter it to be more of a place for people and better aligned with safe system principles? So I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. And Max, while people having to think, any questions coming that I need to deal with, or you got it all covered?
No questions at this stage. Just waiting to unload, I guess.
Okay. We'll give people a couple of minutes. Okay, let's have a look at how people went there. What were you seeing in there, Max?
Seeing lots of mention to restricting vehicle access in there altogether, creating a pedestrianised zone, and lots of people correctly identifying that as relating to exposure. If there's no vehicles there, then very difficult to have a vehicle, pedestrian or vehicle cyclist collision. So well done to those that mentioned that.
Yeah, and absolutely. That's the beautiful first thing to start with when they say place for people as the movement place sort of position, or whatever the equivalent term is in your jurisdiction. Beautifully, you go, can we close the road? Like, why are we having traffic through there? It's a place for people, and eliminate exposure to vehicle, to pedestrian, or vehicle to cyclist crashes at least. And you've still got some other bits to work through with bikes and pedestrians and things like that. But we immediately got some major wins and better alignment with safe system principles. So that's really great stuff. And feel free to give a prize out there, Max, if somebody jumped in there early with just that idea of altering that. What else have we got?
We've got lots of mentioning to providing separated facilities. So this is assuming that there's still vehicles within this area, but separate facilities for pedestrians and cyclists. So rather than having cyclists running there on road, some type of physical separation to better protect pedestrians and cyclists within that space, as well as providing crossing points. So there's actual designated areas where pedestrians and cyclists can safely cross over the roads and yeah, have that priority. And
Well, yeah. So can I comment on that?
please do.
So that immediately, as soon as we've decided to separate, we've climbed up the movement function there. Now, so what I'd say, can I just delete some of, where's my podcast? Sorry, just gonna delete a few things here just to make it clearer. So what we've really done there is said, you know, we're down here somewhere when we've got it just as pedestrians and only, really, you know. As soon as we say we're going to separate, we move it up here, right? And we might even move it into these areas. The reason for that is separation is an immediate indicator of movement. You want to move people through there, okay? So just be aware of that. I'm not saying that it's not wrong, but just be aware it's now moved up, significantly up in the movement requirements. And did people say that changed exposure or likelihood or severity?
Bit of a mixed bag there. Probably just to confirm that would affect the likelihoods, because you're still, cyclists and pedestrians are still exposed to vehicles within that area, and they're still able to have conflict with passenger vehicles. So that exposure hasn't technically changed. However, it's less likely if you've got a dedicated facility where cyclists no longer have to ride on road. They don't have to be within the dooring zone. They don't have to be near the traffic lane. They're protected and they're away from there. And it's certainly less likely that will happen. So it affects the likelihood. So the L that's mentioned there.
Yeah, and I think the important thing is to have a look at the fact sheet on exactly that topic, because it gets a little bit blurry. Max is spot on with one sort of vision of a facility, and others may have had other visions. But like, I mean, the question becomes, how far separated do you change it to exposure? You know, if you've got a 10 meter, or if you've got a concrete barrier in between, and you know, and yeah, so it's a murky area, and we tried to clarify it with the fact sheet, because I would say that some people maybe had a vision in their mind of something slightly different. So yeah, no, that's a good one.
We've also got mention of one-way traffic, Ken. And
One-way is
it is an interesting one. I'll let you go though.
It's interesting because in order to categorize one-way traffic in influencing exposure, likelihood, or severity, you would need to know how that affects volume. Right? Now, if you're just making a circulating block out of this, so you're making this one way, making the parallel one way, you're basically going to have the same traffic volume. It's just all going to be going in the one direction. That is going to only influence the likelihood of crash. It's potentially less likely. Yeah, it is less likely to crash because it's a simpler crossing task for pedestrians. There's a few other, you know, any side roads. It's easier from that perspective, but it's not going to influence the exposure, right? However, if you did have some traffic modeling or something and it showed, you know, one way this, and you're going to make it narrowed down or whatever, and the volume of traffic significantly to come down, now you're influencing the exposure and the likelihood in that sense.
Just another one I think I might mention is the 10 km/h speed shared zone. So creating a shared zone within this area and correctly identified as reducing both likelihood and severity, because if obviously you're traveling at lower speeds in a passenger vehicle, you're more likely to be able to stop in time before colliding with a pedestrian or another vehicle or a cyclist. And also, if that collision were to occur, it would be far less severe than if it's at the current 40 km/h speed limit. So well done for mentioning that one for both likelihood and severity. I think that was Paradin.
Yep, I'll give a prize, a little quick random prize here. What are the legal requirements in a shared zone? A shared zone. Yeah, okay. Apart from speed, that's a good one. Yeah, sorry, well done, Stephen. A shared zone, or it could be a 10 or a 20 km/h shared zone. What is the legal requirement? I think Di's got in there with what I was looking for.
Pedestrian right of way.
Pedestrian right of way, yeah. Pedestrians have right of way through a whole shared zone. Like pedestrians, old cars, vehicles have to give way to pedestrians throughout the whole shared zone. There's a few other really good comments in there, though. I mean, speed, yes. So Stephen probably technically should win a prize. He's had enough today, prizes. Because, yeah, whatever speed limit it is, cars have to stick to that, but they have to give way through the whole area to any pedestrians. And then there was a couple of other good ones. Melissa's popped in there, low vehicle volumes. That is just a guideline requirement, I think, from New South Wales, certainly. And they have some triggers on what sort of volumes of traffic you'd need for a shared zone to be implemented, but it's not a road rule as such. If they decided to put a shared zone in an extremely high volume vehicle volume road, the road rules would still apply. It'd just be misinterpreting the guidelines as such. And then the really good point in there is, again, not a road rules thing, but you make it not look like a road if you're designing it. So, drivers are in a position where it's very not road looking. So they don't feel that, it's like priority for the vehicle. No, it looks like more of a place for people. But anyway, that was a slight aside. There was one more in there, I think, that came in that I did want to address. I was just having a look myself. Eliminate parking. So a couple of people put in parking, and we've seen it come in, and people are sort of saying, is it exposure? Is it likelihood? Well, first of all, I'd say removal of parking just by itself will influence the likelihood of crashes, but it could influence it by going up. And the reason for that is you open up the road, you make it wider, and you increase speed. So the advantages you get in terms of sight lines opening up, so pedestrians don't get hidden behind cars and those sort of things, you sometimes lose from increased speed. So if you're going to remove parking, you want to complement it with curb outstands, local area traffic management, things to bring speeds down as well, or at least keep them down. But generally, car parking removal is a likelihood influencer, not an exposure, because the same number of vehicles, the same number of pedestrians are still going through there. So it's going to alter the likelihood of crashes. Okay, so that's wonderful. And I'm just going to show you sort of what it could look like. I'm going to show you another one, and then we're going to do another little exercise like this while we have a little stretch break and the like. So here you go. Here's sort of a artistic impression design, and of course, artistic impressions we don't look at too much technical detail because there's always challenges, but you do see some similar features. A very low speed. It's almost shared zone. They've gone here with a crossing point, which I really don't think is kind of needed. This could all be shared zone and have complete pedestrian priority through the whole area. But you can immediately see this is a nicer place, isn't it? I mean, it is. It's a nicer place. It's where you'd want to congregate, trade, interact, mingle with the community and the like. It's also very obviously going to be better aligned with safe system principles. Lower speeds, bigger areas for pedestrians, so they're not needing to walk on the road, shorter crossing distances, I said lower speed, but I'll say it again because it's so important, lower speed. So yeah, you got winds all around. But as I talked about, when that movement requirement sort of nudges up, and that's movement of vehicles, but also cyclists and the like, you sort of then start to create bits of separation, more movement requirement. Now we're into separation. We've still got a much nicer place, and we've got good areas for interaction, for trade, for community cohesion and the like. And you're starting to get your dedicated movement facilities. Speed still kept low though, you know, throughout the area, because we're going to have lots of pedestrians and they're going to cross and, you know, and the like. But we're seeing there still really great alignment with safe system principles and acknowledging some more movement requirements. So local streets as a category are sort of fairly low place value, fairly low movement function. If you're doing community consultation and you're in a local residential area, don't tell them that we categorize them as low place value, their area is low place value. They don't tend to like that, but you remember, place is a societal, you know, across your whole city style thinking, or your whole area style thinking. But what we see in these ones, you know, similar stuff, and I won't get you to do the exercise on this one. This probably got far more sort of people in it, but you're seeing now similar stuff where we're getting still lower speeds because the movement requirement is not there. So your speeds can be significantly down. We're not trying to pump people and goods through there as fast as possible, are we? Because it's, you know, residential streets and these sort of things. So our speeds can significantly come down. If they want to go through this area as fast as possible, there should be a parallel route that we've defined as more of a movement corridor for them to utilize. And we want to actively discourage people from using it as that movement corridor as a rat run and the like. So we blanket speeds down, you know, have local area traffic management and stuff. We're seeing slightly wider streets in these sorts of areas, but still really aligned well with safe system principles. Let's jump on to vibrant streets. Now, this is a really, really hard category, okay? And I'm going to give you a little bit of time to do this. This is where you're going to have your stretch break and the like. But this is where we've got high place value, high movement requirement. I want you to remember that though, high place value. We're trying to make this a place to mingle, to congregate, to trade, to interact. Go and have a coffee or a Chardonnay or something. They also still have this requirement to move people and goods through there in different, whatever, you know, form that we want. So let's take this one, which is, you know, a road where it's currently sort of got some movement function going on. It's got some emerging trade and interaction and pedestrians crossing, and it's got a pedestrian overpass here, there, which you can't quite see. A 70-kilometre-hour speed limit environment through there. Now, the aspiration from the road authority here is to have this as a vibrant street. So they're saying, well, it's playing quite an important movement function for people and goods. So we need to keep moving stuff through here. But it's really, you know, built up now, and it's an important place for people. So what I want you to do is ponder this one for a while. We'll give you a good sort of 3 or 4 minutes to think about what would you change in this one? Would it influence exposure likelihood and severity? How do we get better safe system alignment and also better, you know, recognition of that movement and place function of vibrant streets? Yeah, and so just the same as you did last time, market exposure likelihood and severity for any ideas. So what do we say, Max? 3 minutes? 4 minutes? 3 minutes?
Yeah, let's go 3 minutes. Book it in.
Okay. type them in, and we'll see you in 3 minutes. Have a stretch. How long's that been, Max? I lost track of time there.
We're about right to get started again. Hope everyone had a stretch and still getting some answers coming in, but that's okay.
Yeah. Okay. So let's have a look at what's coming in on this one. Lots of good ideas and loving the interaction. Lots of people popping ideas in, thinking about exposure, likelihood, and severity. Yeah, I hope people wake up in the middle of the night thinking exposure, likelihood, and severity. That's my aim. What are we seeing in there, Max?
I've seen lots of mention of separated facilities again, which is always good to see. So separate bicycle lanes, making sure that they're away from general traffic and they're protected. And as Ken said before, depending on how separate that facility is, generally it only affects the likelihood, because there's always a risk that an errant vehicle could still access that bicycle lane. However, if it was fully separated, well away from the carriageway, perhaps shielded by a barrier or something like that, you could say that there's reductions in exposure there as well, because you've reduced that conflict possibility.
Yeah, but it's also on that, Max, isn't it? When you're doing these assessments, it's even when you get that, you've got to cross other roads usually. So
that's correct. Yeah.
It's so hard to actually make it exposure change, but nonetheless, yeah.
Yeah, unless you've got beautiful overpasses everywhere, which there are examples of those, but yeah, it's probably not on these vibrant streets that common. Different speed limits for different lanes, and I think that's correctly identified, suggesting that that relates to severity. If you're able to influence speed in any instance, you're generally affecting the severity of crash outcomes. I'd also suggest that for any speed changes, you're also reducing the likelihood as well. If you're driving slower, just imagine if your own perspective, driving slower, more opportunity to recognize hazard, more opportunity to brake. And if you do have to emergency brake, there's a shorter stopping distance as well. So all of those things kind of relate to likelihood as well. So generally speed falls within likelihood and severity there, but good mention there. Running through here, we've got lots of raised crossings, raised safety platforms and the like running through here. There doesn't seem to be too many major intersections of the like here, but that's certainly something that you could consider further along. This looks like just a mid-block section, but certainly raised safety platforms at intersections would be a good way to make sure that operating speeds are not above those safe system thresholds that Ken has been talking about. Mention of an underpass or an overpass for pedestrians. And that's one you could probably, it's an interesting one because you could put that down to exposure, but that would assume that every single pedestrian within that area uses that underpass or overpass. If it's not an attractive facility, if they have to walk up 24 flights of stairs and it doesn't take them to where they want to go, pedestrians may just walk straight across this road. So sometimes, like in theory, it seems to be the solution, but you may still have risk of pedestrians jaywalking and crossing and, you know, taking the easiest route for them, which may just be at grade straight across the road.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point there. You could sort of predict how many you think are going to use it and then apportion your exposure in that way. But certainly you do need to acknowledge that, you know, unless it's designed really well, it may not be used as much. Now, a couple of things on that though. As a vibrant street, I would say that a pedestrian overpass or underpass actually starts to degrade your place value there. You're really making it less of a place if you're requiring that over movement. It's really well aligned with safe system principles if you can get people to use it, but just be aware it may come with erosion to the place value. The same way pedestrian fencing certainly does. And you can see in here there is some pedestrian fencing, isn't there? And, you know, pedestrian fencing or sort of making walls to stop pedestrians getting into an area. Why's my thing not working? Oh, I jumped forward. My pen's decided to stop working. I don't want that. Yeah, I mean, if we were to create big sort of, you know, maybe higher fences, big, you know, blocking it off so people can't cross at all, you're going to get really good alignment with safe system principles because pedestrians aren't going to be, I suppose, exposed to those crashes. But you've lost place value, haven't you? I mean, that area is becoming more and more like a urban motorway and just not a necessarily a nice place to be hanging out, trading, interacting. Not to say it doesn't align really well with safe system principles, just be aware of that. But really good stuff coming in there, Max. I think we better keep moving along. But I do want to thank everybody for that. Let's have a look at some of the ideas, again, artistic impressions. I took these out of actually a US guide, which is interesting because you don't think of the US these days as your particular creators of wonderful places, but they're getting much better and there's a lot of thinking. But you can see there, you know, immediately see that this is a nicer place. It's got a higher place value. It retains movement function. It may slightly alter how that movement's occurring. More bike movement, more public transport movement. Still got vehicle movement. And then it retains vehicle movement with speeds that are appropriate to the level of vulnerable road user activity. And, we're seeing there sort of lower speeds closer where there's more vulnerable road users activity, get some more higher speeds up through here, but still those higher speeds are pretty close to our tolerable levels. Raised areas, slowing vehicles down at crossing points, you can immediately see that nicer environment. People often say, oh, well, it's not a movement. We're not really getting movement because it's so slow through there. As well, I think the movement at 40 kilometers an hour is still reasonable movement through an area. You obviously, not if it's like 50 kilometers of this or 20 kilometers of length of this. So you might have to rethink your movement, but it's still pretty good. And also thinking about that change in mode possibility. Obviously, like just immense amounts of planning, strategic planning, and thinking to go into this sort of stuff. We're just trying to relate it back to safe systems. And we see some pretty, innovative stuff coming along now in these sorts of streets where we're getting these separated facilities that go through signalized intersections, keep the separation, like our protected intersections, signalized intersections. We've got some good examples of those. Seeing the protected or separated cycle facilities, as Max said, I'd squarely put this in a likelihood reduction, not an exposure reduction, because it's so easy for vehicles to still enter that area or turning in or coming out of driveways or the roads that they're crossing. But nonetheless, we are reducing the likelihood of vehicle to cyclist crashes. Probably also doing, well, no, yeah, I'll keep going. Let's jump to movement corridors now. And we see that these are now the areas where you can actively start to reduce the place value. Okay? Because they've been defined as a movement corridor. And this is where we would start to move, transition them to the creation of more urban motorway feel if it's really we're focusing on passenger vehicles, trucks, and the like getting through there. If it's the cyclist movement function, we're creating dedicated cycle facilities that don't have to stop. Trying to build these overpasses, underpasses, priority through, and really doing things. You can start to do things like blocking off pedestrian access. If it's blocking off, having limited crossing points, or this is where you'd love the overpasses, underpasses for pedestrians and the like, because we don't want people hanging around in these areas. Get them out of there. I'm going to be through there as fast as we can on the different modes of transport. In these areas, though, we do always still need to consider safe system energy at the conflict points. We're trying to minimize conflict points, minimize this interaction. But when we do have, these movement corridors, crossing other movement corridors, if we haven't grade separated them, we need to slow vehicles down to appropriate safe system threshold speeds, 50 kilometre per hour. And ideally, if pedestrians are crossing there as well, we will be going lower than that. Ideally trying to get pedestrians out of there. But you could sort of factor in the exposure of pedestrians into your mix of thinking. So overarching here, we see the pedestrians and cyclists, they obviously are most vulnerable to injury. We know severe injury risk is about 10% at 20 kilometres per hour and almost certain death at 50 kilometres an hour. Generally around that 30 kilometres per hour, we see as a really important speed for pedestrians in how things go really bad really quickly and change. But at conflict points, if you could get speeds down to 20 kilometres per hour or below, we're in a really great position, not only for the safe system alignment, but for encouraging active transport and those other wonderful benefits we see. Of course, the young and the old even more vulnerable to severity of injury, and also have cognitive challenges at both ends of the spectrum in the ability to sort of predict and and avoid crashes. We certainly know that separating is wonderful for cyclists, and lots of good facilities coming up. We're obviously not going to do a whole course on cycling infrastructure and different facilities and how you design them and how to think about them. We've given you a fact sheet there on cyclist facilities and whether you allocate to exposure, to likelihood, to severity. But I really do love these facilities where we are sort of ticking off lots of the boxes in terms of road users and their safety. And we see here sort of the mock-up of the Moray Street roundabout down in South Melbourne for those who have visited it. But this is, providing raised priority crossing points for cyclists and pedestrians. We've ticked off likelihood, we've ticked off severity. It's clear priority, it's raised, so we're getting slower speeds through there. The severity's down, the likelihood's down. We're retaining the roundabout. It's going to be good for passenger vehicles coming through. It's actually going to be better for traffic flow for the overwhelming majority of the day. It's just wins all around from all of those perspectives. And I'm sure we can, if you're interested, we can send you photos or videos of that one in operation. I don't have any in this one because I want to keep moving on. Same theory could apply to sort of more major roundabouts. I haven't seen any of these built in this form as yet, but we're excited for that to happen. And this is where you would sort of separate a bike facility out. It would cross with priority if they were continuing on, and if they need to cross the major road, they sort of stagger the crossing. And this is where I'd see that it would influence the likelihood of crashes, because we've got a good raised clear crossing point, and it's been sort of separated so they can look at traffic a little bit. So that's likelihood. Severity probably down a bit in the sense that obviously here we've got the raise, it'll be slower. Even here, vehicles will have slowed down. Now, coming out of the roundabout, they often pick up a bit of speed, so maybe severity won't have as much impact at this location. We're not influencing the exposure there to the crashes. Max, questions?
I just noted then in that functional design or concept design, they actually mentioned mammals, raised crossing with priority given to mammals, as well as recreational cyclists. I didn't realize that was such a commonly used term in the engineering world. That's
Reese designed it. So
okay.
And mammal being the acronym for middle-aged men in lycra.
No lizards allowed though. It's important.
I mean, the challenge you've got obviously with designing for cyclists, and Max runs a course on cycling infrastructure where we delve into this in lots of detail and have lots of exciting 3D experiences of riding different facilities and the like. But the challenge is that spectrum of riders, isn't it? I mean, you've got your kids, you've got your commuter cyclists, you've got your recreational cyclists, and your mammals, your middle-aged men in lycra, and your racing cyclists, and you're trying to build facilities that sort of cater for all of these users. Very, very challenging. Anyway, let's keep ticking along. I like this little diagram, an adaptation of a Dutch diagram, but just sort of showing generally sort of where different facilities are somewhat appropriate. Low speed stuff is sharing lanes between cyclists and passenger vehicles. And as soon as you're sort of above that, maybe 30 kilometers per hour, maybe even slightly less, but 30 kilometers an hour is really where you have to provide physical separation, some sort of curbing or the like, or pushing parking out. And then up at the higher speeds is that full separated off-road bike path facility. Random quick prize. Person who can tell me the name of that little symbol.
Melissa's in quickly with Sharrow.
Yes, the Sharrow.
Well done, Melissa.
Mashing of the two words shared and arrow together, but it's to indicate an area where bikes and vehicles share the road space. Briefly talk about pedestrians, and then I'll jump on to motorcyclists. So pedestrians, highly vulnerable to injury, of course, with strikes from passenger vehicles. We look at raising pedestrian crossings to wombat crossings, as was in the trivia. And why are we doing this? Well, first of all, the addition of a pedestrian crossing, an at-grade zebra crossing, a pedestrian crossing priority, we pretty much know has in a lot of situations has either no road safety benefit or goes the other way and actually makes things worse. Okay, so there are some areas where they're really appropriate, good, and improve things, but those are areas where speeds are incredibly low already. Putting a pedestrian crossing facility out there with speeds sort of above 30 kilometers an hour, you're going to see that there will be occasion where pedestrians are happily walking along with looking less because they have priority, they absolutely do, and a vehicle potentially missing it with nothing to for them, no reason for them to slow down apart from signs. And we know that the physical raising is just such a huge influence on them slowing down before they approach the crossing point and going through the conflict point at much lower speeds. And so I always have this sort of little rule of thumb is if you have enough pedestrian activity to give pedestrian priority, to make it a pedestrian priority crossing point, there is enough pedestrian activity to make it raised or ensure that those speeds are low. Now, there's challenges that come about with that, but I think all of those can easily be worked through in the design. But if you're not addressing the severity of the crash and just hoping likelihood's going to solve it all, we're not aligning as well as we would like with safe system principles. Raised pedestrian crossings beautifully align with safe system principles because they address the likelihood of crashes. It seems to be, quite effective in terms of reducing the chance that any crash will happen. If they do, very low speeds, and so just wonderful facilities. This one's an interesting sort of example, and to me it shows that we've known what safe system is for pedestrians for a long time. We just haven't been affording it to the general public because this is a picture of Adelaide quite a while back, but there was some workers doing work in the island here, electrical works, I don't know what they were doing, putting conduits in or something. Anyway, they're in there for a couple of weeks, and different people in there working away. And during the time that they were in there, the speed limit was 25 kilometres an hour because it's South Australia and that's their work zone speed limit, as some of you would know, only jurisdiction in the country that does that. But 25 kilometres per hour speed limit. And of course, the barriers set up there, and they go about their work, and then they finish that, and then everything gets removed. And the speed limit goes back to what it was back then, which was 60 kilometres an hour, actually, through there. And there's about 3,000 pedestrians a day that stand right sort of there and where the workers were working. And, they're exposed to this higher speed crash. And people sometimes say, oh, well, but the workers are concentrating on their work. So, you've got to give them more protection. I'll tell you now, the pedestrians are concentrating on their phone, or they are, some of them are intoxicated. You've got a whole lot of challenges with the general public in that sense as well. It's just that for some reason, as soon as we define it as work, death and serious injury is unacceptable. As we the general public, it's up to them to protect themselves, isn't it? I just think that that's a sort of clear example. We know what we want to, we should be doing, and anyway. But we do see some pretty good, exciting stuff. Better facilities now for when pedestrians are waiting in these areas, and protection for them. One thing I would say is, if you're doing a safe system assessment of a public transport facility, it's a big likelihood factor in crashes that goes up, and that is simply the fact that there is a public transport facility there, because people are going to run for their tram or their bus or their train, and their propensity to take risks just goes off the charts. We see that in Melbourne, very staggering way with tram stops in the middle of the road, or even tram stops on the other side of the road if it was curbside. But people will take huge risks at that point where they can see that their bus is coming or their tram's coming, run across high-speed roads, darting out everywhere. There was a study back in the day while I was at the Road Authority, Vic Roads, Road Safety Department. We commissioned a study. It basically found that for any tram route, it is double the pedestrian risk as it is for route without a tram going on it, and it basically comes down to that running for the tram. So as I say, safe system assessing, just think about those sort of things to add to your likelihood factors, increasing the likelihood of crashes. And when we're thinking about, addressing areas, we really want to make sure we do both the likelihood and the severity, and reduce the likelihood. And traffic signals do a good job for pedestrians, reducing likelihood. They're wonderful from that perspective. And often, though, the severity is not influenced. So when we can raise or slow vehicles in one way or another, we get that good outcome. And of course, side road crossing points, raising those, making it a friendly area. I like these where you give enough space for a vehicle to prop as well, if you can, if it works on the desire line for pedestrians. And of course, regulatory speed limits have a wonderful effect in terms of both reducing the likelihood and the severity. Even small changes in operating speed, we see big changes in the reduction in death and serious injury because of that effect, both on likelihood and severity, and that exponential power relationship between speed and death and serious injury outcomes. Anyway, that's the year where the default speed limit went from 60 to 50 for urban areas, and so you can see the massive just drop in pedestrian casualty crash numbers in that time. I'll pause there, see if there's any questions or comments, Max, before I jump into another road user, vulnerable road user.
Good to keep going, Ken.
Very good. How are we going on time? Oh, yeah, timing this beautifully. We'll probably give people just enough time to finish off their assignment or do the quiz before the end of the session as well. Hopefully give you another 5 minutes. But if you have any questions about your assignment or what's coming up, get ready to ask those at the end. We'll have a little bit of time, because I just touch on motorcyclists the way I've touched there on cyclists and pedestrians, and not going to go into in-depth detail. There's lots of material available, or training courses and things on designing for motorcycle safety. But here are a few sort of things to think about with motorcyclists when you're doing safe system assessments, or road safety audits for that matter. But sight, surface, signs, strike, and speed. And so when we think about these, we're thinking about, can a motorcyclist be seen, and can the motorcyclist see what's coming up? What are the surface we're providing for that motorcyclist? Is it going to influence the chance that they crash? Are we providing good signage for warning, for informing, for guiding the motorcyclists? When the motorcyclist crashes, what are they going to hit and how severe is it? And how is the energy going to be managed? That's our strike. I have to make an S out of that word. And finally, we've got speed. And we've talked a lot about speed already in this module, but the influence both on the likelihood and severity of crashes for motorcyclists with their travel speed or for passenger vehicles around or conflicting with motorcyclists. And if you break those down and see, well, what are we influencing there? We know the likelihood is influenced by the ability to see a motorcyclist or motorcyclists seeing what's coming up, the surface that they're riding on, and the warning, informing, guiding signs that are available and out there. The severity is all about the speed and the severity of that hazard that they hit and how they hit it and how they distribute there. But the strike is a severity, and the speed is both that severity and likelihood. So there's been some recent research done by one of our colleagues in Sweden, Johan Strandroth, and a few others, into motorcycle injury crash curves. Now, I don't want you to spend a lot of time and effort on these. I want you to be aware that there are some curves available in terms of the severity of injury, and Mays 3, but Mays is an injury severity scale. Mays 3 is high level, sort of acquired brain injury level, plus F being fatality. So yeah, these are high level ones, and some different crash types. And we see these shifted up from where we had originally thought with pedestrians and cyclists, and we just sort of lumped motorcyclists in with that. They can do these at a bit higher speed in different specific scenarios, but they're nowhere near what a passenger vehicle can withstand. Okay, so even with helmet, protective gear, neck braces, back protection on, and a lot, we're still seeing that a motorcyclist cannot handle anywhere near the force that a passenger vehicle can. So those are in your notes, and a reference to that research if it's something that you want to delve into in much more detail. So let's talk about just a few of these very, very briefly. I don't want to spend a lot of time on them, but sight. Obviously, motorcyclists smaller, hidden behind things. So you can see there, the motorcyclist just behind the tree there was there. And so, even things like small sightline impediments, signal controller boxes, small bushes, tree stumps like this can influence the ability to see a motorcyclist. Motorcyclists seeing what's coming up as well, and being prepared. We've got to be thinking about that. Those are our likelihood factors. The surface is a really important aspect for motorcyclists, far beyond any other road user. And the reason for that is obviously they lean as they go around a curve. They have two small contact patches on the road, inherent instability because of their two wheels. And so any surface defects can be quite influential in the likelihood of motorcycle crash. We tend to call motorcyclists the canary in the coal mine when it comes to surface defects. They're the first to be killed or seriously injured as the road surface degrades. So when you're doing a safe system assessment, you want to be thinking about that, the surface, and when you're scoring, which you do, motorcycle crashes, particularly if you're seeing surface issues, you're going to add that as a factor in your thinking about increased motorcycle likelihood of crash. And of course, any other surface irregularities like steel plates, for example. You can imagine that if it's a bit wet, maybe it's dark, or maybe the rider's following behind a truck or a car or something like that, we're going to see quite a slippery surface for a motorcycle, significantly increasing the likelihood of crash. Severity of crash will depend on what the strike is or whether they're being hit by another vehicle and the speeds and the like. Signs are a really good likelihood altering feature for motorcyclists. Motorcyclists highly attuned to signage changes, things we can warn, inform, and guide using signs. Motorcyclists quite pick those up quite well. We do have available specific signs to talk to motorcyclists to try to reduce that likelihood of crash, to warn of a specific hazard for a motorcyclist over any other vehicle. Surface issues often the ones that you put this up for, where it's maybe not into intervention levels, or it's a recurring gravel on road issue or something like that. You put this up with a supplementary plate at gravel on road or something like that. Ideally, you remove whatever the hazard is, but often, in practical sense, it's hard to do that sometimes. And strike. Well, so this is now motorcyclists hitting objects. So I'll start with barriers, because motorcycles and barriers is quite a hot topic of discussion a lot of the time. I'll chat a bit more about barrier types in a second, but we certainly see, I'll play on this in a second, but I'll just explain what we're about to see. So motorcycle crash test dummy is basically a normal anthropomorphic dummy with some slight tiny modifications, and then you put it in some compliant leathers and a helmet, and then you go ahead and crash it and measure the forces on the dummy. There is a European crash test protocol for motorcyclists into barriers, and it's what we follow usually. It's done at 60 kilometers an hour. Well, it's actually two tests. There's a 60 and a 70 kilometers per hour, but it's a 60 kilometer per hour. You slide the motorcyclist on a sled, and then you stop the sled, and the motorcyclist continues to slide into the barrier system at a 25-degree angle. And so let's have a look at a motorcyclist hitting a post first, and then the second one is with a underrun protection on the barrier system. So hopefully that's streamed for you. And now you can see a motorcyclist hitting a barrier system with underrun protection. And so have a look at that again, 60 kilometers an hour. That basically destroys the $360,000 dummy. But when you've got the underrun protection, it redirects the energy, absorbs some of the energy. And that was a pass with the underrun protection in terms of not exerting forces on the dummy past a certain injury level. So underrun protection is good. It just, I do it to highlight the violence of energy transfer with motorcyclists hitting point source hazards or objects like this in that immediate stop. We need to try and work out how we redirect the energy, absorb the energy over time. Max.
Just a quick question there about if there's any evidence with regards to wire rope and motorcyclist collisions and any of those kind of rumours that have been floating around over the decades.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, and I do want to address some of that. So I might need I'm going to use this bit of white space here to draw some diagrams. Even though it says speed, I'll still talk about motorcycles' wire rope systems. So, yes, it's a sort of myth to a degree. You've got to give the motorcycle community credit for sort of your messaging PR 101, which is to find a graphic analogy and get everybody to say it and stick to it. And they went with the cheese cutter as the wire rope barrier for motorcyclists. And it's a vivid image, and people sort of remember it and spread it. Now, the thing is that it's not based on any actual research or evidence or the like. All the research and evidence, and most of it has come out of the University of New South Wales, and there's been a lot of motorcyclists striking barrier system research, different barrier systems, a whole raft of them. Shows that about half the motorcyclists are off the bike, sliding along the ground. They hit the base of the barrier system. So posts, whichever barrier system it is. Oh, it's concrete, it doesn't have posts, but they hit the base of it. The other half seem to be on the bike, sort of somewhat out of control, trying to regain control. They hit the barrier system and they go over the top of the barrier system very quickly. The motorcyclist does. The motorcycle will then run along the barrier or do whatever it does. In the strikes with wire rope systems, it's still exactly the same. So the motorcyclist is on the ground sliding, hits the posts, or hits the top of the barrier, but goes over the top very quickly. The wires are not interacting, they're not slicing. There is no evidence of that. The only one in all of Australia and New Zealand over the past 20 years that anybody's found where the wires had a role was one out in East Gippsland, and the motorcycle sort of hit the end terminal as the wires sort of came into the ground. And it's sort of unclear exactly sort of what happened there, but there was that was one of tens of thousands of crashes with motorcyclists and different roadside objects. So the first thing is to say that there is very, very rare for motorcyclists to hit a wire rope safety barrier system, because there are not a lot of wire rope safety barrier systems put in areas that are high risk for motorcyclists. And the reason for that is not necessarily a specific design choice, although sometimes it is. It's that the reason really being that we can't put wire rope safety barrier systems on popular motorcycle touring routes or around curves because, around sharp curves, because, well, it's a barrier system that is in tension. Sorry, I'm just in my pen again. So if we're looking down on a road, and if we put a barrier system in here, let's put a wire rope barrier system down on the roadside, and those are the posts. Put our, anchor block, and we then tension up the barrier, because it's a barrier in tension. The wires are in tension. What's it going to do? Of course, it's going to pop into the middle of the road. So there's an absolute minimum 200-meter radius for installation of wire rope safety barriers. And even if you put it in at 200, well, you can see the posts starting to bend as you tension. They want to pop into the middle of the road. So on those popular motorcycle touring routes, your Great Ocean Road, your Waterfall Way, these routes, we don't put wire rope barrier systems because we can't. So there's that. Where wire rope systems are used are your long straights, aren't they? Or maybe very sort of gentle curves. And it's highly unlikely that a motorcyclist will sort of leave the road in these circumstances. They don't tend to fall asleep on the bike and drift and leave the road the same way cars do. There have been some occasions, though, where a vehicle has somehow interacted or something's happened and a motorcyclist has come in contact and gone over the top or been off and hit the bottom. But those are so few and far between. So many more motorcyclists are killed or seriously injured hitting W-beam systems. And vehicles and trees and embankments and all the things that, are out there. So it's so minuscule in terms of the numbers. We should be focusing our energy on the bigger risk issues for motorcyclists. And, we physically can't do it. The wires are not the issue. Where I do have sympathy is, though, that in these very rare circumstances where wire rope is there and there's an elevated risk somehow for motorcyclists, we don't have a good device to make it more friendly. So for W-beam systems, flexible W-beam, or your type B or your G4 systems, your normal W-beam systems, we have underrun protection, as you saw in that video. We don't have something like that for wire rope. But these days, I say, if you're in designing barrier systems and you've got enough concern about a barrier system because of motorcycle safety, you just use a flexible W-beam system with underrun protection. You're going to get almost as good flexibility out of the system as a wire rope system, almost as good safety outcomes for passenger vehicles, and you improve motorcycle safety. So that was a little bit into wire rope and motorcyclists, an area that I've done a lot of work in, actually. But yeah, I mean, it's rife in social media and things that you'd believe that it's somehow the worst thing ever, and it's just, they're just doing a disservice to the motorcycle community. I should say I'm a licensed motorcycle rider. I don't actively ride. I'm far too scared to actually actively ride on the road network, but I got my license a while back and did some riding in order to understand basics of riding and be able to, design and manage roads and assess roads with a bit more perspective from that road user. Any questions or comments coming on that, Max? Popping out a few ideas there, and I know we're nearly out of time.
There's one that I'll just get your opinion on as well, but just regarding those roller barriers, very good, I suppose, slowing down an errant vehicle over a long period of time to decelerate them, kind of gently roll them along the barrier. But I wouldn't expect that would be the same for a motorcyclist. If you were to collide with that as a motorcyclist, still likely to destabilize, go over the barrier system or come off your bike there. I would not expect that to offer much benefit.
Yeah, so roller barriers are, so they're a MASH test level 4 barrier system, so quite a high containment barrier system. I think we need to be aware there's probably a bit of marketing and a bit of novelty in the system. I mean, I wouldn't say like the rolling and rotating of it, I don't think gives you as much benefit as the deflection of another system in terms of energy absorption. So they kind of quash that. It's a nice play on it. You don't have the deflection space behind it, so that's good. High containment, so you can contain a larger vehicle with those systems. They're very expensive. They got a lot of components. They're hard to install. There's challenges with them. Don't get me wrong, but yes, certainly it's an area of interest for the number of installations and the fact that it's getting sort of high profile because it's again another social media fad to sort of like this one of how does that play out for a motorcyclist. Again, probably not going to have as much benefit. I did see motorcyclist groups complaining about the possibility of somehow getting sort of like pancaked in it. That makes sense between the two somehow. I think we're just getting that sort of crazy sort of talk, I think, in the way it is. Those very few and far between in their use, and I think it'll probably stay that way just due to cost, but they'll be in some specific scenarios. But yeah, I don't think anybody's done any specific testing of that I'm aware of anywhere in the world for motorcycle, crash impact. So I don't really know how it would perform. The last one, just to say that influeing motorcycle speeds is like any other road user going to be affected in both the likelihood and severity of crash. The one thing I would say though, is having a vulnerable road user, like a motorcyclist traveling at speeds, we're talking 100, 110 kilometers an hour. If you are to, be able to reduce travel speed from, say, 100 kilometers an hour down to 80 kilometers per hour, operating speed from maybe 105 down to 85 or something like that. What you end up doing in a safe system assessment is saying your influence is likelihood, because you are so far beyond what a motorcyclist can handle in severity that the severity is maximum severity down to maximum severity. Like, we're talking grades of death, really. So we sort of maximize the scoring in that severity level. But nonetheless, if we can pull speeds down, we are going to get good impact on likelihood. And at some point, it enters into the severity of crash as well. Okay, so next module is all about the mechanics of the assessment. Where do you put information? How do you put scores? How do you calculate things? How do you present it? And then we say, here's a site near your house or your office, and off you go and run the process. And yeah, we're excited to get into that. Any questions or comments there, Max?
No, I think you covered everything off, Ken. We're just confirmation that there is a quiz at the end of today's module. So those who got a bit of extra time now are able to complete that on Moodle. Or finish off the last assignment as well. That'd be excellent. Yeah,
so we've got just the one quiz. Today, no extra assignment this module, because next one you get the full safe system assessment to do what? It's a modified one. We don't want you to have to spend too long on it. We just want you to prove the competency. So we will give people an opportunity now to jump out there. Any last things pop in there?
Just from Jessica, how long will it take to complete the assessment? I assume that's the last assignment there, Ken.
The safe system assessment is probably going to take you 2 to 3 hours, maybe 3 hours, I reckon. Just you've got to have a look at a site. It's close by, and then it's just writing up and formalizing. So it's a little bit like the one you did, the practice one, but it's much more detailed and there's much more to it. So you're going to have a good bit of time on it. I think we give you 2 weeks almost, or something like that, Max. We'll tell you
the 4th of November.
Yeah, so we'll introduce it to you on Thursday, and then you've got a good bit of time to work on it. Some people jump straight in and knock it off in the first day or so, finish the course off, but some others take a little bit more time. But we have another session then a week later to answer any questions mid-assessment and do some finalization. But gee, we've almost used up all that quiz time on them, Max.
I know, it goes quickly, huh?
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Wonderful input today. Really enjoyed the interaction there. Thanks again to Stephen for jumping in and talking us through the site. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you on Thursday, and we'll get you out there doing some assessments.
See you on Thursday, guys. Have a good day.